Dr. Kevin Knopf of BlueNote Therapeutics. He's a seasoned health economist, health services researcher specializing in value-based cancer care, previously CMO for Cancer Commons, a Silicon Valley startup engaged in cancer care on the internet. He has extensive background in health services research, pharma economics, and data analytics modeling, and a strong interest and background in value-based healthcare. Senior visiting scientist for 15 years at Epidera, formerly BioSource Corporation, specializing in cancer pharmacoeconomics and outcomes research, editor at Value-Based Cancer Care and the Journal of Community Oncology. He's an author of more than 50 papers, 5 book chapters, and 100 abstracts related to cost effectiveness and quality of care and hematology and oncology. His presentations in various academics and other centers are on large-scale ongoing projects with pharma and payers. Without further ado.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to see if my screen share works and I can pull up my slide deck. Apologies to the audience for the technical problems. I talk for the remainder of the half hour about BlueNote and how we built a digital health company to improve patient outcomes. If I can have the next slide. Well, I guess that slide didn't come through so well. Cancer guidelines are clear that we need to help patients with psychosocial distress during their cancer journey, but there are not enough healthcare providers to meet this demand. The term healthcare provider can mean sort of anyone that touches a patient or interacts with a patient. In the case of psychosocial distress, the main healthcare providers that are in undersupply are social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists, particularly at the point of care where patients would need such healthcare providers in the oncology clinic. And again, oncology has a wide range of providers itself. We have surgical oncologists, medical oncologists, radiation oncologists, and palliative care physicians. All of them are acutely aware that patients have psychosocial needs that are not being met by the current healthcare system. But we have a supply-demand challenge, and that's what BlueNote has set about strategizing about and solving. If I can see the next slide. There we go. So these are some numbers behind why we developed BlueNote and what we hope to accomplish. There are 18 million U.S. cancer patients and survivors. In the 21st century in America, cancer has overtaken heart disease as the most common cause of mortality. And fortunately, most cancers are curable when caught in the early stages. So we have a large cohort of patients with cancer who are part of the healthcare system who have ongoing needs throughout the rest of their life. Survivorship is a dramatic new area. So the need for this sort of a product is growing over time. More than 50%, sometimes 70%, have clinically meaningful psychological distress during cancer. Obviously, if you know anybody who's had cancer, you've had it personally, you know what a blow it is to your life and to your regular routine to face such a serious illness. Even if you have a good social network at home, it can be an isolating experience. So we perceive that this is a great need. About 80% of patients have no access to any psychosocial care with specific needs. And this is a great cause of suffering. So the point of healthcare, whether it's in real person or digital, is to relieve pain and suffering and to improve health outcomes. When you have psychological or psychosocial distress from cancer, we have 35% more healthcare visits. Patients with psychosocial distress are 2.5 times more likely to visit the ER. So cancer patients have a variety of reasons to visit the ER. Often these can be avoided by having the patient see their doctor in clinic or addressing problems earlier. But the more psychosocial distress the patient has, the more confused and difficult regular care can be. So this is a big opportunity to reduce ER visits, which from my economic side can increase cost effectiveness of cancer care. There's a 75% increase of hospitalizations with patients who have psychosocial distress. And one of our main goals in oncology is to keep patients out of the hospital and with their family and loved ones as much as possible. Annual cost increase per patient is $3,000 to $30,000, and that appeals to the side of me that's interested in cost-effective healthcare. lower adherence rates and increased mortality rates. Now, that's of special importance to medical oncology and radiation oncology. Surgical oncology, generally the patient will consent to an operation and have that operation and be in the hospital for that period of time, although there is discordance with having proper cancer surgery as well. But a lot of the medicines we give in medical oncology have side effects or psychologically are hard for patients. For example, breast cancer patients who may not have ever had a serious illness before are suddenly asked to take hormone therapy once a day for 5 years or more sometimes. And adherence to those medicines is very important to increase their chance of cure, but very hard for many patients because of psychosocial distress to remember to take that pill every day. So we wanted to build something that would solve that particular problem as well. And when we treat cancer patients, the goal is to improve their overall survival or cure and to improve their quality of life. So both of those are improved by a digital cognitive behavioral therapy product. Next slide, please. Why am I involved personally? I work with a few startups selectively. I have a pretty much full-time job as division chief of hematology oncology, and I'm giving this talk between a couple patients today. I've been caring for cancer patients for the past 20 years and have seen this problem in the clinic since I was a medical student. I'm a health economist and health services researcher, so I care about access to care and I care about inefficiencies in cancer care. We want to do things that can help patients avoid unnecessary hospitalizations and ER visits and improve their outcomes, and we want to do this at scale. I've seen patients from the beginning. The psychosocial support network is not there for patients in America. I can't speak for overseas, but it probably varies from country to country and setting to setting. We see that these patients have a great deal of psychosocial distress as they come into our clinic. It's palpable when you talk to them and you ask them how they're doing, and we don't have the tools at our disposal to help them. In an ideal world, we'd be able to send these patients to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to see them on a regular basis and help in ways that the physician cannot because of specialized training in dealing with the psyche and emotion. In the best of the wealthiest of academic medical centers, there are psychosocial resources available, but even then that person might not be available at that particular time or particular day. Generally, it's an understaffed position. So I think this is a ripe area for a digital solution. I've seen this myself with my own spouse and my mother who went through breast cancer, their own psychosocial distress, which adds a very different dimensionality for a treating physician. The other dimensionality I've seen is my own friends and even oncology partners suffer from psychosocial distress of oncology and not have sufficient resources to handle that. So we see this interface in clinic, and that's why I'm very happy to have found BlueNote and be involved with a solution for a problem that I think is a serious problem. Next slide, please. Psychosocial distress is undertreated in cancer patients. It can be unrecognized by many providers. We have limited time with each patient, maybe 12 minutes in a well-functioning oncology clinic, and we have to address all the medical issues and pain and chemotherapy and how the cancer is doing. Sometimes physicians don't have the time to just sit and ask, how are you doing to the patient, and hear the response that they're having trouble sleeping, that they're having trouble interacting with their friends and colleagues, that the cancer is weighing on their mind and they can't keep up their day-to-day existence. We have a lack of availability of psychologists and psychiatrists. Where I practice now, we don't have any access to that for patients because our patients are underserved, and there's a disparity in psychiatrists and psychologists for underserved patients, meaning those who have Medicaid or no insurance compared to those who are well insured. We should point out that even the patients who are very well insured have psychosocial benefits that are not the same as pharmaceutical benefits. So if a patient with a top Cadillac insurance company wants to see a psychiatrist on a regular basis in San Francisco, not a lot of them will see that patient on an ongoing basis for talk therapy. We can get them appointments at times for medicines, but the actual talk therapy that's needed for these patients to help with their state of well-being is not available even to some of our wealthiest patients. and most patients cannot afford mental health care out of pocket. I know from talking to patients who have seen mental health professionals that the average cost per session is very high in San Francisco and New York. In other cities, there might be a shortage of psychologists and psychiatrists geographically, and so the ones who are in town may have full practices and not have bandwidth for patients. And as we know, nobody expects to have a cancer diagnosis, so suddenly you have the medical issues to deal with for your cancer diagnosis, and you also have psychosocial issues that are harder to deal with that you didn't know you'd have before you got that diagnosis, that are poorly reimbursed and that are in short supply. So this is an area where a digital solution is great. Is reluctance for some patients to see a mental health professional. It's difficult for them to get away from their work during the day that psychiatrists and psychologists might see them, which is generally from 8 to 5 and not on the weekends or evenings. There may be logistical barriers. Before COVID, it was necessary to usually drive to somebody's office and check in and go to the waiting room to be seen. There's also the commitment that somebody needs to have a therapeutic relationship with a psychiatrist, psychologist, or even a social worker. Next slide, please. From the clinic as a provider, we have limited tools to recognize and treat stress. There are some thermometers, such as the distress thermometers, that institutions are giving to patients. An oncology clinic is busy with 12 minutes per patient on average, and busy where many oncologists work through the lunch hour and are working at night to catch up with messages and charting and things such as that. A lot of focus is on diagnosis and treatment of medical problems, the tumor, the consequences of chemotherapy. Physicians tend to be more comfortable prescribing anxiolytics and antidepressants and not as comfortable with actual talk. There's a lack of training of physicians in recognizing and treating psychosocial distress. Some of our colleagues who go into palliative care are better at this, but they are also in short supply. There's a mixed availability of social workers and counselors in clinic, from none in many places to on some days only, in other places once in a while to regular. It's time intensive to have psychosocial discussions. We are on RVUs, which is a separate talk entirely, but to spend an hour talking to a patient is not how the medical system is currently set up, and reimbursement is poor for many healthcare situations. Next slide, please. BlueNote was created to solve these problems. I became an advisor to the company after they had gone a bit, had raised their A round and had the initial core team. And I became involved through a friend who used to be at Roche, who asked me if I could weigh in on some of the economic principles behind what they were doing. The head of the company are largely from Amgen, people who spent their careers working on drugs to help cancer patients, who were motivated to help cancer patients in a different way. They see this themselves through patients that they have talked to, and of course their own friends and relatives who have cancer. So it's a very nice company to be involved with, because the motives are really focused on helping patients, and that sort of sends a sense of purpose throughout everything the company does, how we conduct ourselves, and how we think about products. The team is committed to long-run building of products to help cancer patients throughout their cancer journey, from diagnosis to remission to survivorship, and has been kind of cutting edge in sort of approaching this. Being here in Silicon Valley, I've seen a lot of digital health companies, certainly in the oncology space. This one is unique enough that I'm very proud to be working with them. The lead product, which we call AttuneRx, you can see this by going to attunerx.net online, and looking at a demo, was created as giving digital cognitive behavioral therapy in consultation with psycho-oncologists. So cognitive behavioral therapy is a subset of mental health care that has become very much in use in patients to help with healing and psychosocial issues, as well as serious mental health issues. It's a standard toolkit for trained psychiatrists and psychologists, but we cannot scale individual psychologists or psychiatrists. So we developed a digital health solution. We are digitizing and democratizing access to cognitive behavioral therapy in cancer patients. The Attune, the first product, is 10 self-paced sessions with cognitive behavioral therapy for cancer patients in distress. And if you go to attunerx.net, you can see a video, which I hope to show, but I think we probably won't have time during this half hour. Next slide, please. Creating products to aid cancer patients. So because of the company's makeup, we're used to the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and even phase 4 concept of creating tools to help patients. Traditionally, these have been drugs and supportive care medicines, but the pattern for digital health is very similar. And so things are beta tested, improved. And then at current state, we have a phase 3 trial ongoing of our lead product, Attune versus standard cognitive test. I've been involved myself in helping get that with site selection, with talking to people, with going through the traditional process of site initiation visits, monitoring patients enrolled on trials. In the past few months, we've started to enroll patients on trials and are getting good feedback about that. I'm trying to get the word to my oncology colleagues at different institutions that I think could benefit from the product. So that's been very exciting for me. There's a psychosocial oncologist whose work I've known since I was early in my training, named Dr. Patricia Gantz at UCLA, who is the lead principal investigator on this trial. And she is part of both study design, implementation, and analysis. And we hope that when the results come in, we'll be writing traditional academic papers to discuss how this product can use, because we think it's unique. We've been working with the FDA on the digital health portfolio, just as any other product or device needs to get FDA clearance. The team at BlueNote is familiar with how to work with the FDA, so they've been in guidance with us with the concept of getting this tool to the hands of patients off trial when the trial is done and hopefully positive. We have continuous quality improvement during the trial. We have several sessions a week to discuss problems with initiating site enrollment, informed consent, and if there's any issues with the software that the patients experience, that's being debugged on a continual quality improvement. Despite the work that happened before we launched this, we always want to be able to provide the best product we can. And so during the clinical trial, as with any other clinical trial, if there are amendments that need to be made, we'll make those. And if we need to improve things, we will. We're field testing in a variety of settings, traditional academic medical centers, cancer centers, whose names you heard of, as well as small private practices, community-based practices, and multi-site cancer practices. So the demographics of how cancer care is delivered has shifted from sort of one or two oncologists with their own private practice to larger groups, to sort of consolidation to larger groups and larger networks to take advantage of scale in things that are important for oncology care, such as purchasing of drugs or information technology. So we're trying this in a variety of settings to see how it works in all those settings, because the goal of the company is to get this into the hands of cancer patients, no matter where they're having their cancer care. Next slide, please. The company was built for long-term success. We know that there are not enough in-person interactions for cancer, and we are in the early days of approaching these issues. We are learning as we go with multiple iterations. There's another product that is going to be launched to clinical trials sometime in the near future called Dreamland. The AML stands for a certain subtype of cancer, which is acute myelogenous leukemia, which is not as common as breast or lung or colon. But AML can affect patients of all ages, and the diagnosis of AML is even a harder psychosocial distress, because generally when you're diagnosed with that tumor, you're put in the hospital and given chemotherapy for a month-long infusion with a lot of toxicities and side effects. Next slide, please. Hurdles and obstacles. We've had the usual growing pains of any company, from concept to building the current team, strategic hiring of experts and advisors. I mentioned Dr. Patricia Gantz. There's a good team of psychosocial people on this. including a psychologist from UC San Francisco, my sister institution. We've been collaborating remotely during the COVID pandemic. That wasn't planned when the company was built. There is a office in San Francisco, which has not been used. And one of the hurdles that I think we're successfully overcoming is to build the first Spanish version of cognitive behavioral therapy online, to make it both linguistically and culturally sensitive. Is there another slide? Next slide, maybe. Long-term goals to ease the burden of cancer and improve cancer care outcomes at the appropriate time, at the appropriate place, by the appropriate means. The company's mission is to become the digital therapeutic provider of choice for cancer patients in distress. Cancer care affects everybody in America, and underserved patient populations, such as the Latinx population, can be more challenging because of language barriers, and we are overcoming those. We will help to be the key company approaching cognitive behavioral therapy for underserved populations, which is a special interest of mine. Further iterations will be working on cancer survivorship, so patients who are done with treatment, as well as management of newly diagnosed and actively treated patients. I think there may be one or two more picture slides. Let's go one more. I think that's it. So I don't know if there's time for questions and answers in the last 2 or 3 minutes, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about what we're doing at BlueNote today.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Kevin. And Steve, if you have any remarks for Dr. Kevin, or if the floor has any questions or comments, feel free to use the Q&A in the Discuss tab. We do have a couple minutes, so.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kevin, I have a question. Are your slides, if someone requests them, can we share them?
I think so, yeah. I think the company would seem to be fine with them. I had hoped to show a demo of the product, which is at attunerx.net. People can go there. I think that's mentioned in one of the slides, but I'm free to share the slides. Feel free to share the slides. I'm fairly easy to find on the internet. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Kevin Knopf. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to discuss BlueNote's product and collaborative opportunities as we move forward. It's something I'm very passionate about and very proud to be working on.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, Steve, anything you want to say or remarks?
No, this has been a great presentation, Dr. No. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And please, by all means, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to ask away.
And with that said, I guess we can head over to the next keynote speaker room, Miss Janine. So we'll all head over.